Well, hello, slingers. Welcome to the first Wordslinger Podcast of 2025. I'm glad you're here. We're going to start the new year right. So thank you for tuning in. Stick around. You're not going to want to miss this interview.
It's the Wordslinger Podcast, where story matters. Build your brand, write your book, redefine who you are. It's all about the story here. What's yours? Now, here's the guy who invented pants optional, Kevin Tumlinson, the Wordslinger.
Wordslinger.
Well, I am Kevin Tumlinson, the Wordslinger. Rolling into the new year, I'm real excited to see what's coming. 2024 was an interesting year, and I'll talk about it some more. I think we'll make that our note at the end today. I think you'll enjoy it. Yeah, and I'm anxious to hear what you experienced over 2024 and what you got planned for 2025. Make sure you're leaving some comments, on YouTube and elsewhere to kind of fill me in. Let me know what you got going. But speaking of accomplishments and new ideas and new and exciting people, we're going to meet today Robin Hamilton, who is I love chatting with her because she's one of those people. So we shared something in common, which was the production and creation of documentary films and television. And we have media backgrounds and things like that. So this was a great conversation. It brought back a lot of memories for me. It was kind of in a way I oddly sort of miss my days in television after speaking with not just Robin, but some. I did another interview for the Writers Inc. podcast. It's going to be coming up soon, and that gentleman does documentary film work. So I've had a lot of that kind of coming at me. I kind of miss it in a way. Like, I don't know. I was thinking back on some of the experiences I had in producing these shows and these films, and those were interesting days. It was pre-Cara, so I wasn't married yet. So of course things were a little different. But there was a kind of energy to that work, and it's storytelling, which I love. But there's something different about that kind of storytelling. It's about discovering that story. It's about discovering who these people are that you're talking about, what the meaning is behind this historic event, or what sort of meaning can we draw from it? What are the metaphors? So it's very sort of symbolic. You're taking abstract and boiling it down to something concrete. Very interesting sort of work. I kind of miss it. So maybe I'll start looking at, how can I do more of that kind of thing going forward? You know me, I'm a content guy. I like to create stuff. So that's what this conversation with Robin did for me. Plus, when you think about storytelling, when you think about, how do we craft a story that's engaging, and how do we, where do we find inspiration, those sorts of things. The work that she's doing, she's doing things that I think all storytellers could and should do. Whether you write fiction, genre fiction, literary fiction, whether you write, nonfiction, memoir, Substack, whatever it is you're doing, however you're creating, there's a vein of story out there that we can find and mine and craft from. And I think that our guest today, Robin, she gives some insight into that as a process. So wonderful woman, amazing storyteller. So I hope you enjoy this interview with Robin Hamilton. Stick around after this for the note at the end, and I'll see you on the other side. Well, I'm always excited. Every guest comes on and I say, I'm really excited about this guest, but I'm actually very excited about this particular guest because, some of you who've listened to me for a while know that I have a background in film and TV, documentary film in particular, way back in the day. But my next guest does it way better than I ever did. I'm talking to Robin Hamilton of Around Robin Films, or Around Robin Production. I didn't ask you that part.
Oh,
Is it
sure. A round robin production company.
Around Robin Production? Okay, so yeah, so I've already messed it up
N-
right off the
Not
bat.
even. Not even.
But welcome to the show, Robin. I'm happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here because when I found out about you, I love to cherry pick and find podcasts that are inspiring to me. I felt like I opened up a treasure trove of information with you, Kevin. You've done so much. Your creativity is just non-stop. I started our conversation by saying you're so prolific. So I am looking forward to this conversation.
You don't have to flatter me. You're already on the show. You're in. Uh,
Thanks. I'm just
but
speaking honestly.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
As I said, I back in the day, I mean, this is like early 2000s. I worked in documentary television. I did some stuff for PBS. I did some stuff for
Mhm.
History Channel, Discovery Science, things like that. So I know what a grueling, difficult, challenging career
Mhm.
you have. But I'm curious. I want to find out, like, how did you come to this business?
Mhm.
What brought you in?
That's a great question. I started off as a reporter and I was doing a lot of interesting stories. As you know, with the work that you do, you get to meet different people every day. And I'm sure that's what interested you when you were doing documentary early
Yeah.
on. The problem is when you're working in news, unfortunately, there's a cycle where you get to have pockets of interesting moments. And then
Yeah.
I was finding myself sucked into the crime and weather vortex. So
Yeah.
I was often covering the bank robberies and the car accidents and the snowstorms. So those those sad people that you see out in the middle of the snowstorms that are telling you don't go outside. I was one
Right.
of those. And it just wasn't fulfilling for me anymore. And I had a contract. I hopscotched up and down the East Coast. I was in Florida, I was in DC, I was in Boston, and my contract in Boston was up. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I ended up freelancing. And I had a colleague who knew someone in DC at the Tribune TV station at the time, and they were doing longer form feature pieces. And so
Mm.
I did some work for them for a while. And while I was working with them, I was finding really interesting stories, historical pieces of news, so to speak, just historical stories around the city that people weren't really covering. And I pitched them to my executive producer at the time, and he just wasn't interested. I just wasn't
Yeah.
getting an opportunity. So finally, a friend of mine said, "Well, why don't you just do it yourself?" And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about starting a business and incorporating." And she said, "Look, you're already doing the work. Why don't you just figure it out and do that?" So that's I'm giving you the very condensed version, but that's what happened.
Yeah. Here's the good part though, because you were a journalist, you already knew how to research things. So
That's
you didn't
right.
know how to do it, so you just go and play journalist and figure out how that's done, right?
That's exactly what I did. Yeah, I did. I went to a small business incubator and they had an opening, a little meet and greet. And so I just sat, I started asking questions and I started meeting other people who are small business owners. And that's really how I ended up learning the non-glamorous nuts and bolts of
Yeah.
incorporating and doing your taxes and all that stuff.
Taxes. I haven't done that yet. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, what was the like when you got into this? Because the first thing, like when I first got into doing anything TV
Mhm.
related, it was all excitement. It was all,
Mhm.
I can't wait to, we did some really cool stuff. We talked to some really cool people, but then like the nuts and bolts and the business side of it wasn't quite as fun. So what was the first thing you encountered that you didn't like about the business?
I did not like having to do all the paperwork. I did
Yeah.
not like all of the administrative aspects of it, figuring out, do I want to be an LLC or a solopreneur? What kind of insurance did I need to get? And for
Yeah.
me, when you're hiring a crew, you have to think about the type of insurance you have. What do you want your business to look like? Who are your clients going to be? Are you going to have more government contracts? Are you going to have more private corporate clients, or you're going to have small clients? And having to think of that, creating a business plan, which I do think is good. Some people say don't have a business plan. I created a business plan. My incubator coach said you should do it because it's a roadmap. It's not something you have to adhere to hard and fast, but
Yeah.
it's good to have because it will give you guidance in terms of metrics, things you want to achieve, what you want your 1, 3, 5 year plan to look like. And if something doesn't work, you can tweak. How do you want to network? Who do you want to network to? So having to think about all that, it's very important. And I'm glad I did it. The hardest part was, and I still haven't figured this out, is how do you find the days to be creative, the days to
Yeah.
actually create, which is why I was so, not to flip it on you, but which is why I was so intrigued by you because you've written so many books, you've created so many podcasts. To have a space to have your own business, but also to make sure you have designated time to be creative, that really is priceless.
Yeah.
Creative time, if you're a creative person, to sit and think and let ideas marinate, there is nothing like it.
Yeah. It's a privilege, right? Like
Yeah, right.
I'm very grateful for the opportunities I've had to do that. And
Yeah.
when I don't get to do it, I'm grumpy, very grumpy Kenny.
Right.
Just ask my
Right.
wife.
Yeah. 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 You feel
Yeah.
like something's missing when you
Yeah.
don't get to do it. And so I don't know if that, you encountered that having your own business, but it's a necessary evil. But you have to really be almost really aggressive with setting aside creative time.
Yeah. I feel like I'm constantly having to build and maybe even reinvent the business though. And so I'm intrigued by the
Yes.
whole business plan. I've done business plans in the past. They
Hmm.
always end up being kind of a wreck. I'm curious about yours. Because someone told me once that a business plan, a really solid business plan, is a living document, that it's going to
Hmm.
change alongside the business.
Yes.
So, what did you have to do when you guys? And I'm sorry, this is the part you said you didn't like the
Yeah, I
most,
know.
but
It's so
this is
funny.
what everyone's curious about. Like,
Yeah.
what did you?
Well,
How did
thank
you
you.
do it? Like, what was the structure
Sure.
you ended up kind of going with?
Yeah, absolutely. What I did was I broke it down into the name of my company and its core mission, its values, what it does. And so my tagline is bringing your vision to life. And
Yeah,
that whoever you're interacting with, what is that vision? It could be my vision. It could be your vision. And I
yeah,
say that because I decided to bifurcate my company into two parts. I made one part for client work and one part for documentary films.
okay,
The part for client work, initially in my business plan, I decided to say, who is going to be my primary client? So in DC, that's where I'm located. You have government contracts, you have mid-sized companies, and then you have smaller nonprofits. So trying to get a government contract is nearly impossible. It's like a behemoth
yeah,
to like scaling a giant wall. I thought I was going to be able to get it, but I didn't. And then corporations, they usually already have production houses
yeah,
in-house. And so that was really hard. But the nonprofit space was almost by accident because I had met a colleague who worked in the nonprofit housing space, and she needed to do a fundraising video to raise money for their annual gala.
yeah,
And you can find large enough nonprofits that have a real budget for marketing videos. And that's what I ended up doing. They were my first clients. And from being in that space, I ended up getting referrals to other nonprofits that had budgets. And what I liked about that was in that space, they were big enough in that they could support a real project, but they were small enough in that they gave you the space to be creative. And more importantly, they're telling stories that allow you to really shine positive impacts on society, on
Yeah.
community. So I got to do work with a soup kitchen, an organization that creates affordable housing, another legal organization that provides services for people who are poor and may get a ticket and then they can't pay the ticket, then they get a fine, then they find themselves in jail and then they lose their license. This nonprofit provides legal service so people can get their life back. So those are really cool stories to tell. And it was in line with my values and with what I really wanted to do, with how I told stories. So that's why it was nice to have a mission statement about what I was about and what stories I wanted to bring to life. And that mission also reflected my documentary work about people who were making a positive impact on society and how they were changing others' lives for the better. So
Yeah.
anyway, I broke it down into the mission, who my market was, and again, I had a lot of failures because I couldn't get into certain places, and then what I expected the earnings to be. And it is a living document because when you don't open those doors, then you have to really pivot to
Yeah.
who your target audience is going to be.
That's so it sounds to me like there was sorry the microphone is doing its
No,
thing.
no.
It sounds like there's a solid alignment between the client work and the
Yes.
creative work, which is
Hmm.
something I struggled with. I was a anything for a buck guy for a very long
Uh-huh.
time in that business, Like
Yeah.
if you
I
know
get it
if your
though.
check clears, yeah.
Yes, I get it, and it just so happened I even considered doing weddings and real
Yeah.
estate at one point, but
Yeah.
those doors just didn't open or people didn't follow through. But I told that's how you're hustling when you first start off. It's kind of anything for a buck, and your roadmap is Ideally, you'd like this to work out, but I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah. Well, because it's one of those businesses where there's certain things you could probably do with no budget.
Yeah,
If you already own the equipment, if you don't own
right.
anything, then that's much more
Exactly.
challenging.
That's right.
But these
That's
days,
right.
everybody's got an iPhone. At least you could
Yes.
shoot on an
Yes.
iPhone if you had to. 4K video, man. I remember
Yes.
back in the day, like renting the first HD
Yeah.
cameras.
Yes. And it was expensive.
They were
It was
expensive.
expensive.
It cost us
Yes.
a couple $100 just to have a couple of
Yes.
cameras on site. So I think it's very fortunate that you were able to align those things.
Thank you.
How does it translate then to the creative work? Do you like segment off a certain amount of profit from each, client job,
Mhm.
or how do you fund the work?
That's a great question. It does fund itself to a certain extent. And again, this is when it goes back to what you were saying
Yeah.
about your business plan being a live document, so to speak,
Yeah.
a living plan. It's always iterating. And the hardest thing is when you have a nonprofit, the model that I have, it's a once in a year thing. So
Yeah.
I may have five different clients, but they have a big fundraiser maybe once a year or once every 2 years. And so what I ended up doing was, yes, that funded the business. And then when I wanted to do a documentary, I would apply for grants as well.
Mm,
And so I used the grants and the profits from the business to allow me to do the passion work, which was film.
yeah.
And that's kind of how that worked. But it's very challenging because the client work, it's feast or famine. I mean, the real
Yeah.
secret is to get a client that will put you on retainer,
Mm,
or you will have just a monthly project, something small even, but something that will be recurring. You want to have recurring. Having a project that's one and done just is not the best way to go. And that's I learned that the hard way.
yeah.
Mhm.
That is the challenge. Because
Yes.
not only that, but like if you haven't, I don't know if you have employees, I don't know if you've got
Yeah.
crew. Okay.
I have 1099, so I
Yeah, yeah,
hire people right that way.
yeah. Yeah, that's the way I did it too.
Really? You did too?
I think that's the best way, actually, because
Yeah,
nobody can
it
get too
keeps you
uppity.
lean. Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. It
But
does
it's
keep
not
you
even
lean.
that. It keeps you lean, and it's also easy because when I used to work in a newsroom, there's a lot of personalities you have to manage, and if you have
Yeah.
to work with that person every single day, sometimes I've worked with some terrific crew, and then when I was first starting out, I worked with a couple of guys that were just jerks. And so not and being able to just not work with them again is very liberating.
Yeah.
So it's, technically speaking, it's easier to just find the people you like, and they're usually working, as 1099s too. So they're fine with that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting business. I mean,
Yeah.
all businesses kind of have that little bit of that flavor, but
Yes.
when you work in TV at all or film at all, it's everybody is kind of chasing the same star, I think. Like we're all
Yes.
out kind of trying to build something.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the secret is what is the big star that you can kind of put your hook into
Right.
and really soar,
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I'm waiting for Kevin's, movie deals
Yes, I am
because
also
you
waiting for Kevin's movie deals.
yeah, I gotta say, because you've got a lot of really great action-packed material. It's
Well,
not
there
easy. So,
it's not. Yeah, no, none of that.
uh,
None of it's easy.
yes.
All creative work, especially when you're trying to kind of use it for an income, revenues
Yes.
is
Yes.
challenging. Let's talk about
Exactly.
some of your film stuff though.
Yeah.
Because the most
Yeah.
prominent one is I'm going to read the whole title, but
Okay. Okay.
This Little Light of Mine: The
Yeah.
Legacy of Fannie Lou Hamer, which I
Yes.
did watch the trailer. I haven't watched
Uh,
the film.
yeah.
Sorry.
No,
Uh,
no, you're kind of busy. It's
yeah,
okay.
well, yeah, but I'll get to it. But that's
Yeah.
it's a civil rights story, which is
Yes.
hot right now, and
Yeah.
it's got all the right notes, all the right elements to touch the heart.
Mhm.
I can already tell.
Yeah.
So,
Thank
talk a little bit
you.
about that. How did that come about?
Thank you. Believe it or not, I got that story when I was in college. At the time, I was an undergrad in North Carolina. I was doing a student paper about, and this was 20 years ago. So I'm telling my age, but I was doing a story about the desegregation of Durham.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was researching women and the civil rights movement. And I came across this book called This Little Light of Mine: The Life of Fannie Lou Hamer by Kay Mills. And I was so impressed by this woman who, the sharecropper who had a sixth grade education, was forced to pick cotton, and she became a huge voice in the civil rights movement in the 1960s and was really instrumental in the passage of the Voting Rights Act a year later. And a lot of people didn't know about her because she was a woman, she was poor, she didn't wasn't quote unquote polished, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And she just was one of those figures in history, or one of those characters that stick in the back of your mind. And I'm sure you can relate to this as a creative. When something sticks in your mind and they won't let you go, you
Yeah.
feel like you have to do something with that.
Mm.
And so I just, along my career, I kept meeting people who knew of her. And finally, I said, I've got to do something about her. I was talking to a guy who had moved back to DC, and he knew her. He had been jailed when they were fighting for voting rights. And he said, get back in touch with me and we can talk about doing a film. Great. And then I found out he passed away a year
Oh,
later. And I realized, oh, I don't have time. I've got to do it now. And so I've got a grant, a very small grant. I'm so grateful for the Sam Rubin Foundation for giving me a little grant, and I went to Mississippi. I met an amazing crew. I went through the Mississippi Film Bureau and found a great crew that gave me a tremendous rate on filming my interviews. I filmed them all in one day, and
wow.
they were terrific to me. They were really kind to me, and I just ended up doing this film as a love letter to her.
Yeah.
And and it just ended up taking on a life of its own. So it's not fancy. It's very simple, but it ended up being in film festivals. It was on PBS. It had a life of its own that
Yeah.
really was just a great surprise. And it gave me confidence. It gave me confidence to say, hey, I can apply for a grant and do this. Because if you sometimes you step back and you think, wow, if I really gave myself a moment to think, could I really do all that? You'd say,
Yeah.
no way. Really, think about it, Kevin. If you looked back at your life 10, 15 years ago and said, am I really going to write over 100 books?
Yeah.
Would you have said, yeah, no problem?
No, I probably would have crawled into a closet and wept,
Right,
like the
right,
very thought. And that's I have
right.
this conversation with people all the time because I've talked to people and I've said, I know a lot of authors. I hang out with a lot of
Yes,
authors, do a lot of speaking engagements and stuff. And they all get it. They've all figured it out. But when you talk to someone who's an uninitiated and they
yeah,
say, I could never write a
right,
full book, and I'm like, that's because you think of it as I got to sit down and I got to write this 300-page book.
right, correct,
But the reality is you break
correct.
it into these little pieces. So
Exactly.
I want to ask you about the grants and stuff because that was something I've only had a little bit of experience with that and not
Hmm.
so you clearly you've mastered that.
Hmm.
But how do you find the grants? I mean, where's that process start?
Sure. Well, what I did was depending on where you live,
Yeah.
there are humanities councils in your state. And so often those humanity councils have uh, have grants set aside for creative projects. And a lot of times those creative projects need to reflect what's happening in your area. So if
Mm,
it is region specific, then you can find that. And then there are different books that you have to find. And there was something that I used called the Foundation Center too.
yeah.
And they had resources that provided grants. And you just do a very targeted search about what you want your project to be or what your project is about, who you want the target audience to be, and what is the desired outcome. For example, is it going to be shown at schools? Is it going to be shown on TV? Do you want it
Yeah.
to be used as an educational tool? And what I found is, again, it kind of zaps the creative
Yeah.
spirit out of you, but you have to divide that. Like, look at it as I'm making this delicious meal and I'll take out the trash later. So
Yeah.
washing, like, right, writing the
Gotta
grant is
wash the
kind of like,
dishes. Gotta
yes,
yeah.
yes, washing the dishes and
Yeah.
taking it, right? Or I shouldn't say taking out the trash. Let's say doing the grocery list.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes it sound nicer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's the yeah.
and yeah, so, but I do think that having an end goal, thinking about where you want people to see your film, that does help you think about how you want to bring it to life.
Mhm.
So it does give you some clarity.
Yeah.
Because for me, and I'm sure you can appreciate this, I've talked to some people who say, "Oh, I just had an idea and I didn't have a budget and I did." At the end of the day, when you don't have a lot of money and time is limited, you do have to be organized. I did
Yeah.
not have the luxury of just kind of being, oh, willy-nilly or whatever. If I had to take time off of work or I wasn't getting a client, I better be organized. I need to know
Yeah.
who I'm interviewing. I need to know how much time that's going to be, what days off I need. And having that type of clarity and focus helps when you're writing a grant.
Yeah.
Grant makers or providers really do like specificity. So
Yeah.
that's what I would say. So go to the Foundation Center, look at your Humanities Council, and that will give you some guidance on grant process.
So you just kind of you hit the profundity note in my brain just now because a lot of the complaint you hear from people if they're going to get into any sort of business, production or
Mhm.
anything else, is that they don't have the money for to do XYZ.
Yeah.
I love what you're saying though, is that, if you don't have the resources, then organization becomes your resource. Like
Yes.
getting down into the details, like, money
Yes.
money can kind of smooth a lot of things out. But if you don't have
Yes.
money, then you got to be,
Exactly.
detail oriented. Yeah.
Right, right. And I have to say, I've sat on panels, as I'm sure you have, where you're talking to people who have been in the industry, and they'll say, oh, they'll kind of turn their nose up at people who are in local news. And
Yeah.
that's fine. But for me, having to work low and lean has really been an asset because it makes you resourceful.
Yeah.
And so when you don't have money and the leisure to be willy-nilly, you do it and it does give you clarity.
Yeah.
And just to say one thing, I had listened to your podcast you had with Jenna Brown
Oh, yeah.
a couple of months ago. And what I loved about that is set small goals because even the
Yeah.
smallest goals can mean something. And
Mm.
I say that because when I first started out on my first film, I didn't know what kind of opportunity I was going to get. I had gotten turned down from multiple grants.
Yeah.
I had gotten a ton of rejections. And I said, I'm just gonna try this one. I'm just gonna try this one. And you just do that one little step and it can help move you forward. And before you know it, you look behind. Oh my gosh, I have 20 steps behind me. And so each little goal matters. So being
Yeah.
organized, even if it seems like it's something insignificant, it does matter.
Yeah. I think this is applicable to just about everything that I've ever been involved in, especially
Yeah.
being a writer.
Yes.
People don't think about writing and publishing like that in the terms of it being a business, a solopreneur
Yes.
kind of thing, but it
Yes.
absolutely is. And I
It
think
is.
the approach you're taking, the approach you've taken to to around Robin is the right one for I
Mhm.
think all entrepreneurs really.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
that kind of comes down to you know what you want, you have your goal, I mean, be specific about it, and then start
Yeah.
building, steps to get to it.
Yes.
Let's get a tiny bit woo. I'm going a little
Yeah.
tiny bit woo. Did you
Okay.
find that when you were doing like any of your projects, really,
Yes.
but like the Fannie Lou Hamer
Mhm.
one in
Yeah.
particular, did you find that things just kind of started as you would make this tiny bit of progress here, suddenly you met this person or you found this book or you encountered something that kind of tumbled into it and furthered
Yes.
things along?
Yes, Kevin. I'm so glad you asked that because what happens is when you are on a path and you feel like I'm not going anywhere. This is so frustrating. Nothing's
Yeah.
happening because so often you're working in a silo. You have your crew and then you get back and you have to go through the footage and the research and all of that.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of pictures from the FBI of Fannie Lou Hamer that I really needed for the film that would have been significant. And I looked on the website. It's this form. The form was long. They said it's going to take 2 to 3 months.
Mm.
And the grant deadline said for part of the parameter of getting the grant, you need to have this project finished by X date. I wasn't going to get the files until after if I got them at all. I mean, you felt like it was basically a FOIA request. It was
Yeah.
the Freedom of Information Act request to get this done. And I just said, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I filled out the form and literally in 2 weeks with no notice, I got the picture. I got the files.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. And not only were they the pictures that I needed, but there were a couple extra. And I don't know who sent them in. I don't know who expedited it, but it gave me the chills.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened. The same things actually have happened with all of my films, believe it or not. I won't go through all of them, but I will say my all of my films are my favorites. It's almost like
Yeah.
picking
I hear you.
children.
No, I
Yeah, right,
understand.
right. Your books, yeah. But I the one about Odessa Madre, she was a
Mm.
black lesbian gangster in the 1950s who became a millionaire running a numbers ring in DC. And nobody wanted to talk to me about her because she was considered so taboo. And so
Yeah.
you have a lot of conservative, old school black folk who were very respectable, who said they never participated in the numbers, but you kind of knew they did.
Yeah.
And I met this one guy who said, you know what? I can tell you who you can talk to this person, this, and it just opened things up. And then when I went to the National Archives, I was researching her. and I happened to come upon a file that had her whole rap sheet, and it just made all the difference in the world. So it's like if you poke long and hard enough,
Yeah.
and then things open up. And so I say to people, I did not think I was going to be on this path. I really didn't. I had a whole goal for what my career was going to look like,
Yeah.
and it completely shifted. And yet I was able to make these projects. And it just was a very unintended but pleasant surprise.
So it sounds like you're doing well. Sounds like it's
Oh, thank
working.
you.
Uh,
Thanks.
and I'm excited about everything I'm seeing. I know my wife is going to want to see every one of these as well. So,
Oh, thank you.
you've got two viewers.
Mhm.
Where are you going from
Thank
here?
you.
What's the next evolution of the business plan as it grows and, evolves?
That's an excellent question. Um, I'm trying to figure out that's a really good question because, for example, Odessa's Rain, I loved doing that film, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking of turning it into a feature. And I don't
Hmm.
know if that's going to be a live action feature, but I know I want to do something with that.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing. I think the hardest thing for me is I haven't given myself the time to step back and think about the next creative project I want. So
Yeah.
Odessa is a big part of that puzzle, but I haven't given myself the time to think about what I want to do next, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I love being able to converse with people like with other creatives like you because it's wonderful to say, "Hey, how do you come up with all your ideas? How do you set
Right.
aside time to do that?" So it's a really good question. I'd probably like to do some podcast and pick people's brains, but I
Yeah.
just love learning people's stories.
Speaking of quote doing podcasts,
Mhm.
that's another avenue for you
Uh,
for Odessa. You could do
Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah, like a almost a
almost like a
fictional
true crime. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and I've thought of that, and that is something that I'm considering. And I think once you get over the oh my gosh, how am I going to do that
Yeah.
thought, but I have thought about that.
This is
Just
what's really
yeah,
fascinating
go ahead.
about this era is that
Hmm.
um we can own the means of production and distribution.
Yes,
Like
yes.
YouTube has democratized that entire thing in a way that back when I was working in film and TV, man, I would have killed to have something like YouTube.
Oh yeah, it's true. And you
Yeah.
really maximize it. I have to say, I mean, I have so many questions for you. I want to be sensitive of your time, but
You're fine.
yeah, I
No,
mean, you've really maximized it because that's exactly it. I mean, my work and the films that I've put up on YouTube or the segments that I've put up on YouTube, it was because I wasn't really getting an opportunity in traditional media. Those
yeah,
doors just weren't opening. And now you get to create
yeah,
all of these pieces of content that you think are worth sharing that people clearly enjoy.
yeah, yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the age of the independent, the artisan age,
Yes.
as I call it. This is the
Yes.
artisan age.
Yes. And
So
you basically get to tell the gatekeepers that they can go
yeah,
stuff it.
yeah, which
Yeah.
is fun. That part's
It
fun.
is fun. I gotta tell you, it is fun because if I listened to anybody else, I would not have these films would not have been made. At least not the way that I think they deserve to be made.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad to hear
Yeah.
that you're out there doing that. And
Thank you.
I'm going to be an avid supporter of you going forward. And I know
Thank
everyone
you.
listening and everyone watching on YouTube as well. So,
Oh, thank you, Kevin. Thank you. Well, like I said, I have subscribed now to your work. I can't wait to promote. I think you give such great tidbits on your website. You have that little segment, something else, I think. Is that what
yeah,
it's
a
called?
note at the
Something else.
end.
Oh,
Oh, right.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, there was a little thing I was doing for a while called Kevin Tumlinson wants to talk about something else. That was
Something else?
the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That was great too. I
I should
mean,
do that
I
again.
just,
Yeah.
I gotta tell you, that was so much fun because you had something about what a con man
Yeah.
can teach you.
Yeah.
And I loved that. And that was one of the things I wanted to mention too, was because just a side note for Odessa's reign, you said, convince yourself of who you really want to be. And she was
Yeah.
someone in history that wasn't considered, she was a woman, she was kind of hefty. Nobody gave her any type of, you didn't really pay attention to her, but she had a brilliant mind. She was clever, and she became this larger than life figure. And that's something that we can all take away, even when it comes to being a business person, because
Yeah.
I always thought I thought it was alluring to go into business for yourself, but I never really understood how I could become a business person. And then when you start to actually do it, you realize, oh, yeah, I'm actually kind of doing this. So anyway, I just
Killing it. Crushing it.
a lot of your stuff really resonates. I just thought it was such a good tidbit. So
Well,
thank you.
I
I'm a fan of
appreciate that.
yours.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to have you
Yeah.
on more often.
Okay.
Anytime I'm feeling low about myself, have Robin Hamilton on.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I don't understand why you're low. You just did a whole audio book, so
Oh
no
my
need to
gosh.
feel low.
Nobody knows about that yet. So you're
Oh,
teasing
oops,
it.
sorry.
You're teasing it. No, that's not. That's fine. But
Okay. Yeah.
I did
Yeah.
it as
Promote.
kind of a favor for another Robin, actually.
Oh, really?
So
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I'm waiting to see what she thinks. I did it as a favor.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's something I'm kind of looking at too. But here we are at the end, unfortunately.
Yes. Yes, of course.
Yeah, we'll have to wrap it up. But I'm really glad you took time out of your clearly busy schedule and came and hung out with me. Where can
It was
people
my pleasure.
find more about you and your films?
Absolutely. You can go to aroundrobin.com and go to the film library. You go to shop, and you can just, it's a little subscription, and you can see all my content for a full year. And, I hope you really enjoy it. It's about little known pieces of history, and
That's my favorite.
I'm really proud of it.
Yeah,
Thank
that's my
you.
little known pieces of history is kind of what I've been making my bread and butter on for the past 7 or 8 years, honestly,
That's
which is
great.
the
That
stuff in the
is,
books. So, all
yeah,
right.
that's fantastic.
I'm sad to end this one, but thank you again for being on the show, Robin.
Yeah,
And
Kevin, it was my pleasure.
uh, everyone else tuning in, listening, watching, whatever, the note at the end is coming up soon. So stick around for that, and we'll see you there. Take care. I've always believed life's too short for boring stories. So I write the kind of books I'd want to read. Action-packed, fast-paced fiction. Adventure stories with characters you'll wish you could hang out with. And twists you'll never see coming. From ancient mysteries to modern day thrills, my books take you on a wild ride. And trust me, I've got plenty of rides to choose from. So if you're ready to escape into a world of danger, discovery, and intrigue, it's here waiting. Find your adventure at kevintumlinson.com/books. Not responsible for sleepless nights. Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. I really loved chatting with Robin, getting to know her. I'm looking forward to getting to know her even better in the years to come. I'm going to try to keep circling up with Robin and get to know her better and follow her career. It is fascinating to me to think about, like, I love storytelling in all its forms, and you know that. So what I do here, the podcast, all the podcasts, everything that I produce, it's all about telling a story. It's all about the story here. If you listen to the Wordslinger opening, but so any methods we can, this is why I want to bring on guests for this show who aren't necessarily in the publishing industry, because the more time we spend studying how storytelling can be told, can be done, rather, let me just loop back. the more we can study how storytelling is done in a variety of ways, the more enriched we become as storytellers. And so we get new ideas, we get new resources, we get new, processes and tactics. Um, that's what that's what's important in this. Um, and I'm trying to bring in people even outside of the sort of creative and entertainment industry um, to talk about their stories. I reached out to some folks here over the past couple of weeks during the sort of the break between Christmas and New Year's. Some brands and things that I like, that I appreciate, and want to know better. I want to get the story behind their story. I want to know like how'd you get started, that sort of thing. And there's just something to learn there for us as writers and creators. There's something for us to take. And if you're an entrepreneur, I see entrepreneurship, by the way, and business ownership is just another form of storytelling. If you think about things like brand, you think about like when you're looking at the market to determine what the market wants or what it can support. You're doing the sort of work that a documentary filmmaker would do. You're dipping into a well to figure out a story so that you can craft that story and give it back, so that the consumer, the reader, the viewer, the customer can benefit from that story. Story is very important. This is what I'm thinking about as I go into 2025 is the value and the power of story. Um, Not new for me. This is an ongoing thing for me, but I'm kind of this one of the things I've been doing. I have this, let me see if I can pull this up. If you're watching on YouTube, you get a special bonus, but I bought this 2025 planner and I put my little sticker on it, by the way. Always brand your stuff, but I'm still figuring out how I want to use this, but one of the ways in which I'm using it is sort of jotting notes on the graph paper side of the whole thing. I'm not going to be able to open that page, but the and the rest of it, I don't think it's a waste, but I may be wasting about half of this thing because the parts that I'm going to use are very similar to the other notebooks that I keep. I'm a man of habit. I'm a creature of habit. Uh, but the thing that I've been concentrating on is getting clear on. I don't like the whole goal setting resolution thing that happens around New Year. I don't think it's effective. I think that we've diluted what that is and what it means over the years. So I'm trying to kind of find new ways to approach this so that I'm accomplishing the things I want to accomplish. What I have is an intention for who I want to become or who I believe that I really am at the bottom of it all. And so I heard something interesting today. I'm listening to a book right now called The Courage to Be Disliked. I'm probably only about halfway through the book, but I heard something this morning which is relevant to this, which is, oh, well, now it's just going to blow right out of my head. Oh, how embarrassing. Well, sorry. Sorry, you're just going to have to read the book and see what insights come to you. I don't know why it dropped out of my brain. All right, whatever. We're going to move on. But my aim for 2025. Oh, it was about being who you're in competition with. All right, thanks, Kevin. You brought it back around. So it was the idea of that there's no real benefit to being in competition with anybody. If you're going to compare yourself to anybody, compare yourself to who it is you intend to be, the ideal version of yourself. So that's what I'm trying to do is define the ideal version of me, the person I intend to be, and the career that I intend to have. I'm also trying to embrace that sort of Zen thing about letting go of expectations. Like the source of all our misery is the source of suffering in the world is expectations. The book I'm talking about, The Courage to Be Disliked, it says that all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. Everything can be traced back to your relationships. Um, yeah, maybe. I think though that our expectations on everything are what set us up for disappointment and failure. So if you're writing a book, for example, with the expectation that that's going to hit the top of the New York Times list, then it adds so much pressure to writing the book that you may not enjoy the process. And then even beyond that, it's like if it doesn't hit certain markers, then you just weighed down by the sense of failure in the whole thing. So I write a book. It's a struggle to write a novel, right? Or any book. Long format takes time, takes planning sometimes. Um, but even if you're not a planner, like it takes focus and a lot of energy. And, so you've put this weight on yourself. It's got to be good. It's got to be the best there is because that's what it takes to get on the New York Times list. And then if you're a self-published author, it won't get on that list. So if that's your goal, it means you got to put it out there for agents and publishers to discover. So if you don't land an agent or publisher, then there's the weight of failure from that. Let's say you get it that far, and an agent picks it up and represents it, and a publisher isn't. They're interested, but then they turn it down, and the process starts over. So now you're taking a hit there. Let's say that it gets picked up by a publisher and it goes to press, but they don't have much confidence in it, so it only gets like a short run of books, and that those have to do phenomenally well. Or they let it go and it doesn't do that. And so there's the hit you take from that. Let's say it does well, but it didn't sell quite enough to get on the list. There's the hit from that. And even if it goes all the way and it makes number one on the New York Times bestseller list, what is the secret expectation you actually had for that book? Because getting on a list, that's no problem. I can Photoshop my name onto the New York Times list, So just seeing my name on a list isn't really the accomplishment. It's what is it going to do for my career? So let's say that it gets all the way to the top, but that's it. That's where it goes. And now you've reached this peak and there's nowhere to go but down. Um, that's this philosophy of like, that's why there's this philosophy of don't set goals. Instead, create a mission for yourself, a process or something. I lean in on the mission thing. So that's what I've been doing. It's like, what's my mission? So I'm not setting goals in that traditional sense, except as sort of waymarks. Like, I have a goal of, I want to finish this book in 30 days. Those goals are manageable. That's the kind of goal you can kind of work backwards and figure out like the process that's going to be required to meet that goal. So it becomes that's probably more of an objective than a goal, but yeah, that's the way. Or the goal is the book, but there are objectives in between starting and finishing. So I'm going to write 2,000 words a day for 30 days. I'm going to edit within this time frame. Those are the kinds of things you can do. So you can kind of reverse engineer that goal. But the goal, a more vague goal of like, I'm going to be a wealthy and successful best-selling author. Um, that's too, there's not enough meat there. There's not a skeleton there. Like it's just an abstract. And so what you want to do is get a little more concrete, but you still need those abstracts, right? You still need a sort of an ideal. And if I'm going to, if 2025, I've got this mission, which is to improve myself. I've got a more formal version of this. There's personal things in it, so I don't want to quote it or write it down for you per se. But the idea is like I have a mission for my life. Actually, 2025 just happens to be a slice of that. Um, Within 2025, there are some things I do want to accomplish, but they have to be concrete. I have to be able to say, okay, this is the thing, and now working backwards from that, this is how I get there. If it doesn't meet that, then it isn't a goal. I'm kind of going all over the place here, but what I want you to think about and understand is the thing that you want to do is create that ideal version of yourself that you want to try to live into. But don't like castigate yourself or blame yourself or come down on yourself if you don't live into it. It's not necessarily the end goal. It's the thing you're pursuing. It's the ongoing mission, right? Like, I it doesn't you need to come up with a mission for yourself that it doesn't matter if you don't accomplish the specific thing. It's the work toward it that matters. Like you don't want to evolve and then that's it. Game over, right? You want to continue to evolve. So, I want to read 100 books this year. Great, but what's the real in-game goal for it? Because it's easy to read 100 books. Easy. You know what? Proof. Go to your local half-price books, go to the children's section and pick up 100 10-page books and sit and read them right there. You could totally do that. You can totally do that. So it's not read 100 books that matters. It's, what are you really trying to accomplish there? Well, I want to develop an ongoing habit of reading every day. Okay. So take the number out of that and just read every day. You don't have to be so specific. Just focus on the thing that's going to get you ahead. Know why you want to do it. Why do I want to read more books? Well, I want to be better read. I want to read all the classics. Okay, read all the classics, but you don't have to say, I will read one classic a week. You don't have to do that. You're putting too much pressure on yourself. Now, if the goal is you want to, you want to accomplish that as a sort of trophy, by all means. But the idea here is, why are you doing it? Did so and so read 100 books, and so now you want to do the same and match their progress? Now you're competing against someone else. And so if you're going to read the exact same books they are, and you're just trying to prove that you can read them faster or whatever, or that you can do it too, I guess that's fine. But yeah, it's just not. It doesn't appeal to me. It's not attractive to me. Like I'd rather get into a habit of I'm going to read every day, I'm going to write every day, I'm going to draw every day, I'm going to practice a new language every day. Um, because especially when it comes to something like language, mastery is a lifelong process. Um, the goal of writing for me is to produce books, but that's not the only reason I do the writing. I do the writing because I love it and I enjoy it. So just saying I'm going to write 2,000 words a day, 5,000 words a day, yeah, that's a way for me to sort of guarantee some progress within a certain time frame and meet a target, a deadline. Um, but I'm fortunate enough in my career, like I don't really have to have those deadlines. And if I do, then that's when I have to put numbers on it, right? So the goal there, the point there is you have to accomplish something within a certain time frame or whatever. So you use the tools you have. But if your goal is I want to look back on my life and I want others to look back on my life and say he was the writer, he was the one who wrote, and he wrote every day because he loved doing it. And as a consequence of writing every day, he put out this many books in his lifetime. I don't want to have to chase a number of books each year. Um, and that's the way I've kind of operated my writing career over the past decade or so, a couple of decades, three-ish decades. But I don't see it as profitable for me anymore. For one, and we've talked about this on the show in previous episodes, but the whole rapid release thing, while I will contend is probably still effective in some respects, is not quite as beneficial for a writer like me as it may once have been because AI can do it better. And so AI will spit out 1,000 books a day or whatever. And whether or not they're high quality doesn't matter to certain readers. Well, those aren't the readers I want. I want readers who appreciate. I want that 1,000 true fans. I don't want just 1,000 people who are willing to buy my books, whatever dreck I put out. I want the people who are going to appreciate what I did, what I created, the amount of time it took the fact that I took the effort to craft it, I've got to focus on quality over quantity at this point. You may be different. I'm willing to concede that. But that's what the important thing to know is like, what is it? What is it you're trying to accomplish? I'm trying to take numbers out of my life as much as possible. Trying to take, I don't want to I don't want to stress anymore that, I had a 5,000 word day at Target, and I didn't meet it every day. And so now I feel bad about myself, feel down on myself. Um, my life right now is a little different than it was when I was putting out 10,000 plus words a day. A little different. It's harder, right? But at the same time, um, here's what I've discovered. I took the number out and said, I'm going to write every day. I'm going to work on fiction every day. Even on days like today, today is a production day for me. So I've got this podcast that I'm recording now. I just got off of the Writers Inc. podcast where I was recording. There's prep work for both of those. It requires my attention and time. I have to listen to interviews. I have to, write down questions and things. There's a whole slew of things. I've got more interviews happening today. I've got other things that I have to record today. It's a production day, and so it's very time intensive and very busy. But before I was giving myself kind of a pass on production days. I'm going to not care that I didn't get any words written. I'm not going to just not going to write on those days. Then I'm not furthering my real intention here, which is, I'm a prolific writer. I mean, it's what I am. And I that's the thing I love. The rest of this stuff is kind of bonus in some respects, but it's also just, it's all about supporting that writing. So if I'm not doing that writing, then I'm not accomplishing my actual mission. So forget goals, forget targets. Am I making progress on my intention, making progress on my mission? And the answer was starting to become no, and starting to become a lot more frequent than I was comfortable with. So I made the decision. This is part of my mission, and the way I accomplish it now is I'm taking numbers out. So no longer am I trying to aim to hit a word target each day, but rather the question is, and I've got the reason I keep looking off to my right, if you're watching me on YouTube, is that I have a little chalkboard here that I write down goals and other things. But a question I wrote was, did you write fiction today? Not did you write 2,000 words or 5,000 words or however many words, but did you write fiction? And so the decision was, if I write 50 words, if I write 5,000 words, if I write 20,000 words, the point is to answer yes. And what I've discovered is that by taking all the pressure of that number off of it, I am frequently writing far more than the word target that I initially had set for those days. So it just becomes easier to further my mission when I stop trying to measure it in those terms. Is this for you? Could this help you? I think it could, but I also think that we each have to evaluate the advice we're given based on the things we're trying to accomplish. Because there was a point in my life, and there may be again, where it was beneficial to me to set that word target. It's how I started this whole career. It's how I went from writing a book every 2 years to writing a book every 15 days for a while. It's how I went from making, $100 in a year on books to making a living from the writing. So things can change. And the point is that we are not in competition with anyone else. We are only in competition with who we intend to be. And that, in context, at any given time in our life, at any given moment in our life, should be the sole thing that determines our approach. We need to revise our approach from time to time, like I've done. 2024 was a rough year for me. I entered 2024 2023 was a really rough year. And then that was the year I left Draft to Digital and I became CEO of Book Sweeps. So I began 2024 as the CEO of a company. And then by March, I had stepped down and I had to deal with all that. I felt like a failure. I felt like, I was untethered. What am we going to do financially? Kara and I had this deal, because I had some money set aside. We're going to use that to supplement what I do, and then her job will do the rest. And then a week or so after that, she lost her job, and so we had this year financially. We had this year, so we're at the end of this year now. So things are getting a little tight. Things are getting kind of troublesome for us, and things aren't where I hoped they would be. But the year was a little rough at first, um, because I was too locked into this idea of what I thought I probably should have done. The regret. I had some regrets about certain decisions I made. Um, but somewhere through the year, and I'm going to say around June, I had this moment where, you know, I had gone into this kind of anxiety, depression thing to the point where I decided I would see a therapist. But about a week before, 4 days before I saw the therapist, I went to a coffee shop to get some writing done. And when I was leaving, I was sitting in the Bronco and I was distraught. The writing was hard. Um, I felt like a failure. Felt like I can't do this anymore. I don't understand. This used to be me. This used to be my identity. Writing was always the thing that I loved and I was good at, and it was gone for me. And I sat there and had this moment, and I referred to it as a chase. And it was like, now I'm a Christian believer, so for me this was the Holy Spirit acting within me. But what happened was all that voice, that negative voice that was in me, kept telling me all these things, and this other spirit of truth started to question it, and it became unrelenting about it. It wouldn't let me lie to me. It wouldn't let that little voice get away with the lies. So it would say, um, this was my identity. I've lost my identity. Well, is that true? Do you do no writing at all? Do you ever write? Yes, I write. Yes, I do. Yeah. But the writing is harder now. And it stinks. Does it really stink? Or what's the truth about it? Is the writing, difficult because maybe you're trying to make it better than it was before, or do something a little different? Yeah, I had to admit that was true. I was trying to do something better. I was trying to evolve as a writer. But I'm a failure. I failed at the CEO thing. Did you fail? Didn't you decide rather that it wasn't a good fit? Didn't you and the founder of that company decide together that things weren't working out, and so it was better for you and the company and everyone else if you stepped down? Wasn't that the decision? Yes, that's what it was, I guess. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and it was this chase, as if my inner demon was being pursued relentlessly by truth, and I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I just wouldn't allow it, and the result of that was exhausting, first of all. But when it was all done, and it was all done while I sat in this vehicle in a parking lot in the middle of summer, with the air conditioner going and feeling exhausted and feeling like a failure. And when it was done, I drove home in a kind of a slump. I took a nap and I sat down and I started writing again. I wrote some journal entries. I did some new things, and suddenly I could do it again. Suddenly I was reborn again. And I was no longer anxious or depressed. The anxiety kind of comes back every now and then, but it's so muted compared to what it was. At that point, it was just my reality. And it was the only thing I could see. It was the only thing I could see. And then suddenly it was like I turned my head and realized I've been staring at this wall with these shadows playing out over it all this time, but there's an entire actual world out there where these people are three-dimensional and real. And that's a reference to Plato's cave, by the way. But that's what happened for me. It was like when I wouldn't let myself lie, when I wouldn't believe it, when I just relentlessly pursued that part of me and forced it to admit that it was lying and to tell the truth, it changed everything. I ended up going to the therapy sessions. I had paid for some in advance, uh, and I went 4 days later and told him all, from the start, I was no longer feeling the things that had driven me to go there, and those sessions did not necessarily benefit me in any way, um, except to confirm that I was over it. I stepped up. I grew. I became whole and new again. And so that's where the mission started to evolve, where I realized the changes I needed to make. I ended up finishing the outline that I was doing for, JD, the book he and I are working on, that had taken so much out of me for some reason. It became easy. Did it over the next couple of weeks. Wrote the first 3 or 4 chapters over the next couple of weeks. All these things that were so impossible for me before suddenly were not only possible, they were easy again. And I still struggle. Like I still have this weight every now and then when it comes to the writing. But it's a little bit like as I wrote in a Substack post last Friday, I'm learning to wiggle my toes. You'll have to go find the post on Substack to it's called Wiggling Toes. So go find that, read that. I'll try to remember to put a link to it in the show notes. But the point is little movements at a time, backed by intention, backed by the insistence that I'm going to continue to grow and move forward. And in this move towards my mission. So it's not about numbers. It's not about setting a goal or a resolution and then, adhering to it. It's about deciding who it is you intend to be and what it takes for you to be that person and measuring yourself on the progress you're making. And then that takes the rest of your life. So, and it's a good life. You learn how to be happy that way. You learn how to be more than you ever dreamt you could be that way. That's the point. So anyway, I hope that this was helpful to you, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Robin Hamilton. I know I did. I can't wait to reach out to her just to let her know that this is live. But that said, 2025 is going to have some horrible, horrific moments for you. But wait, it's also going to have some of the best highs and the most joy that you've ever experienced. And it's up to you to decide who you're going to be in all of that. If you will approach this year and this month and this day and this next 15 minutes and this next 30 seconds, if you will approach it all from the standpoint of I'm not in competition with anybody, but that highest version of myself. I am dedicated to a mission rather than a arbitrary set of goals or objectives. And my intention for my life is to live it rather than become a slave to it. These things are going to change your life and your perspective. I pray for you. So, thank you for tuning in. I hope that you enjoyed all this. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe, and comment. That helps me out on YouTube and elsewhere. And make sure especially that you are sharing this with people, because I want to reach a broader audience this year. That's an objective, a goal. It's okay to have these things, but don't let the numbers and the outcomes, don't live for the outcome, live for the process. So take care of yourselves out there. Have a blessed 2025. God bless each of you. And I'll see you all next time.